I've been sent here to negotiate.
We are talking about Robin Hood the Rebellion. This one directed and written by Nicholas Winter. Now we have a high budget Robin Hood movie coming out in 2018 starring Taron Egerton. So here we have a low budget indie flick, obviously telling this tale of the iconic English legend. Now this one actually isn't an origin story. So in this film, Robin Hood is already established and it actually kind of takes place when the merry men are all together and stuff like that. So it almost seems like you are watching the finale of a Robin Hood TV series. That's what it kind of feels like. And there's actually been a couple of Robin Hood TV series here in the UK. And because these guys are already established and the kind of the low budget kind of quality of this movie, you do feel like you're watching like the series finale of Robin Hood, the TV series. That's kind of what it feels like. So ultimately, the kind of the plot here is the Sheriff of Nottingham has kind of flushed out Robin Hood and captures Maid Marian along with Much, and Robin Hood along with Will Scarlet and Little John have to infiltrate Nottingham Castle to try and rescue Maid Marian and obviously defeat Guy of Gisborne and the Sheriff of Nottingham. So the story here is nothing new. I have to wonder what was the decision to make this, because it really doesn't add anything new to the mythos of Robin Hood. It doesn't really try any kind of new approaches. I've seen some of the reviews on IMDb and they are scathing, a lot of the user reviews, and yeah, I mean that's one of the things is well, why does this movie exist? And it's a fair point, but I don't think you can kind of just completely write off a film at the same time purely because it's, you know, it doesn't really do anything new with the genre. We're going to look at it on its own merits. So let's look at what works first of all with this movie. So what I liked about this movie first and foremost was some of the location shooting here. Because they do, I mean, being a low budget film movie, I was impressed with the fact that we are using real kind of like interior shots and exterior shots of castles and stuff like that. So I thought that all looked pretty good, and it's kind of, if you've ever seen the TV show Robin of Sherwood, they do a lot of the same sort of thing, but it just kind of looked good. It adds that kind of air of authenticity to it. So I quite like the fact that the location shooting here is actually pretty good. I think the pacing of the movie isn't too bad. You know, it's not over long, and there's plenty of kind of like action sequences throughout the movie. I think the characters are, you know, fairly kind of well defined. You know, you're not losing track who's who, and Robin Hood does seem. One thing I liked about this movie is that you really do get the sense that Robin Hood is just a guy really trying to keep his head above water, and he hasn't got this kind of like huge army of kind of peasants and kind of rebellions and stuff like that. He's just a kind of like has a very kind of small band. So his odds are really not in his favour. And the Sheriff of Nottingham with his kind of like, you know, the Normans and all of that, obviously far outnumber him, and so you do feel that you know, how's he going to kind of get through there, and the way they cast it and kind of acted, you know, the kind of like the way the characters are depicted, they seem like just run-of-the-mill normal folk to a certain degree. I didn't even realise it was Big John until late, halfway through the movie, when they referred to him as John, because he really isn't all that big. Sorry, Little John, but he's not really that big a guy. And there are some kind of quite sort of fun characters on the kind of the Sheriff of Nottingham side, Guy of Gisborne, and they've got this like huge, massive guy played by bodybuilder Martin Ford, who's kind of like this like Incredible Hulk almost, although he's got quite modern tattoos, so they haven't bothered trying to kind of like hide, which I found a bit of an odd choice, but there you go. So what doesn't work? So just to kind of repeat what I've said there, this movie doesn't have anything new to the edges of the genre. So you wonder why this movie kind of like, they thought it would be a good idea to make this. I mean, it's okay. I don't think it's necessarily a bad movie in any stretch of the imagination. I think it's, for a low budget kind of ultimately a fantasy flick, it's completely passable, but it just doesn't have anything really kind of new, and mediocre is kind of the best way I would describe this movie. I've certainly seen worse, and I've certainly seen worse Robin Hood adaptations, but there's nothing here that kind of will make you want to see it. There's no kind of like unique selling point. Other things that I didn't like, Sheriff of Nottingham was just too much of a kind of a boo-hiss villain. Now, one frustrating thing here that I thought was a missed opportunity. Now, if you remember, there was a film adaptation that starred Russell Crowe, and that originally was going to focus on the Sheriff of Nottingham, actually tell it from his perspective, but they didn't do it in the end. And there's actually an attempt here, not with the Sheriff of Nottingham himself, but some of his cronies to try and kind of like give you their point of view, almost. And then we have a couple of there's like a female kind of like, there's a female just person who's in the castle who tries to fight Maid Marian, and she's actually trying to defend the Sheriff of Nottingham's point of view, and I think someone else does it as well. And it would have been a good point, but the problem is that the Sheriff of Nottingham is portrayed just to be this cackling pantomime villain who you know goes on about how cruel he is and stuff like that. So unfortunately, it's totally missed a good opportunity there, which that would have made this movie unique, I think, to try and have it. So yeah, he's a bad guy, but maybe he thinks he's doing the right thing. And the frustrating thing is that some of his cohorts may think that, but he certainly doesn't, and he certainly isn't portrayed to be anything other than just a kind of like I've said, a moustache twirling villain. So that wasn't particularly good. The choreography and the fighting is poor. There's a few instances here where you will see people sword fighting, and you can see them. They're kind of obviously doing very kind of slow strokes with the swords and stuff like that, obviously to not damage people in real life. But it's just not very well shot, and there's nasty edits within this movie as well. Finally, I've got to say the soundtrack is good. I like the soundtrack, but the audio levels are a little bit kind of like skew with, and I think sometimes the soundtrack overpowers the vocal track. So sometimes it's difficult to get. It kind of is a little bit overpowering sometimes, and I thought they will just kind of pull back a little bit with having this kind of like very kind of powerful music playing, so you can kind of get a bit more of the kind of the sense of dialogue. There's one scene that I really liked that involved Brian Blessed, who is Friar Tuck, who is only in one scene. But nonetheless, it reminded me of a video game. It reminded me of playing Skyrim, where you kind of come up to an NPC and he kind of imparts some wisdom on you and stuff like that, and gives you like a weapon. And the music that's playing really reminded me of Skyrim as well. So I really kind of like that scene in particular, and obviously Brian Blessed's a national treasure. So I like that scene, although it is only kind of one very relatively brief scene. So overall, I would say this is an acceptable, passable kind of Robin Hood movie with, you know, so-so performances, but nothing really to kind of stand out. A few kind of, you know, okay action set pieces, but aren't shot particularly well or aren't edited particularly well. So it's just kind of mediocre ultimately. But like, to be honest with you, I didn't think it was a bad movie in any stretch. And reading IMDb and some of the kind of the reviews, it's always like either 1 or 10 stars. It really irritates me. So I'm actually going to give this a 5 out of 10 because I do think it's not as bad as that kind of makes it out to be, but it certainly isn't anything other than mediocre. So it's a bang on average review of 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.